Welcome to the Igniting Impact podcast, brought to you by Public Knowledge. I'm Stacey Moss, your host and president of our management consulting firm. Our firm's vision is to be a catalyst for change, leaving each person, project, client, colleague, and community better than when we started. This podcast is an opportunity to share what our clients and partners do daily to make a difference in the world, and this season's theme is all about change. We know that change is everywhere. It's in our work, in our communities, in our systems, and within ourselves. And this year, we are looking and exploring ways to approach, adapt, and manage that change. Today, I want to welcome two guests from Public Knowledge to the podcast. We have Colin Watkins and Julie Breedlove joining us. Thank you so much to both of you for being here today. We'd like to start today by just getting to know you each a bit more on a professional and a personal level. So let's start with Colin. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your professional background and what you do for work today?
I am the director of health and Medicaid at Public Knowledge. I got my start in software testing about 27 years ago, back in high school, way back in the day. And so that's sort of fueled my love of quality ever since. For a long time after I got my diploma, I was working for firms and utilizing enterprises, and even worked over in Department of Defense for a while and worked on a EHR system there. So that was my first introduction to electronic health records and health in general. I was offered an opportunity at PK, and it was to combine something that I love, which is software testing, one of my passions, just because of quality, with Medicaid, which was something I was becoming more and more passionate about, albeit as a layman, because I have epilepsy. And one of the things that I was becoming frustrated at the time was the care that I was seeing, that I was getting and that others were getting around me. So I thought this was my opportunity to take a stand and start to help those around me and combine it with that thing I love, which once again is quality. So I've been the director for several years now. Been with Public Knowledge since on and off since 2009.
That's great. And Colin, until today, I didn't even know that about you. So thanks so much for sharing it. Important for those of us traveling with you to know. Lindsay always gets mad at me because I don't tell people about my anaphylactic peanut allergy. And I'm like, I don't want to talk about it. She's like, we have to know if we're traveling with you. So, all right, Julie, tell us a little bit about your professional background and what you do for work.
Yeah. So, Colin, thank you for telling us that. Now I know if I'm traveling with you too. So I think that's really great to know. Yes, I have a background in social work. Both of my bachelor's degree and my master's degree are in social work, and I really spent my entire career planning for, preparing for, implementing, supporting, and improving change. I've worked in a variety of different settings in health and human services. Started my career out in public health, working for a nonprofit organization. I worked in state government for many years, and then worked for a training and technical assistance provider for the federal government, and then landed at Public Knowledge. And it's really interesting. The one similarity I see across all industries is everyone deals with change, big and small. So I really love our podcast season's theme about change, because everyone who works in all industries deals with change, whether it's big change or small change. So currently, I serve as Public Knowledge's People Practice Director. And so, what this means is I help guide our firm in developing high impact leaders, teams, and individuals to inspire change. So, in my day to day work, I help design and implement our methodologies around our work that relates to people. And really, that encompasses a whole variety of different areas. It includes learning services and our work in organizational change management, strategic planning, leadership development, developing teams, and so on. And I'm really passionate about working with groups and with our clients, and particularly in building high performing teams who are able to deal with and handle change on a daily basis.
Okay, so on a more personal note, I'm curious what principles or values shape how you approach change in your life, both personally and professionally. And Colin, do you want to go first?
I am by nature, surprisingly, kind of cautious when it comes to change. I'm one of those people where I like to have as much data in front of me as possible to kind of hit the right change at the right time. I've been a part of organizations where we've attempted to make a change and it just backfired, and leadership sort of lost control over that. So ever since then, I've been a little shy to jump on and make that. Uh, Weird thing is though, when I know it's necessary, when it's absolutely necessary, we have to make this change. I am one of the first people that'll be ringing the bell and really wants to do it. I'll jump right in. But it's that sort of period where maybe we should make a change, maybe we shouldn't, where I'm a lot more hesitant. And that's where I'm always kind of worried about a self-inflicted paralysis.
Julie, what about you?
Yeah, it's so fascinating to hear Colin talk about his cautiousness about change because I think I'm on the opposite end of the spectrum. I really value change for the sake of continuous quality improvement. And so I need people like Colin on my team who may be a little more, may need more data and may need to have all of the information to make the best possible decision when it comes to change. So I personally value adaptability and resilience. And what that looks like for me is being flexible with changes that come my way. I feel like a lot of times in our work and also in our personal lives, we really can't control the change. So being able to be adaptable to it and to change our attitude, change our approach, change really whatever's going on, and being adaptable to that is something I personally value. And also, being resilient. I feel like a lot of hard change is thrown our way either at work or in our personal life. For example, like I moved from an urban area to a more rural area, which is a huge change for me. Being able to be resilient around like how I go to the grocery store and where I do my shopping. And, it just takes more time when you live out in the country. Also having, less access to doctors who are around, having to drive for those things. But being able to be resilient through that change, I feel like makes me better equipped to navigate change and see it as a growth opportunity. So I really feel like that applies for the work that we do at Public Knowledge and also in my personal life.
You said something that kind of hit me there about surrounding yourself with people that help you out. And I completely agree. That's why I need people like you around, because I'm one of those people that I can get comfortable in a situation regardless. And because of that, it's kind of a dangerous thing. It's good that you can adapt really quickly, at least speaking for myself. But when you get comfortable, then you're less likely to make the change when it's absolutely needed.
You talked about like the not being able to control a change and getting, I think it's taken me more than 40 years to realize no matter what I do, I cannot control the changes around me. And realizing that and coming to terms with that, I think has been a big part of my journey in the last few years. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I really do view change as a growth opportunity. How was this change, whatever it is that's coming my way that I can't control, is going to make me a better person, a better consultant, a better manager, a better teammate. So, really looking at it from that perspective, I think helps too.
it does. Thanks so much for sharing about each of you individually. What we wanted to explore today, and the reason why I have the two of you on, is to talk about the intersection between OCM, so organizational change management, and our Medicaid practice. So, looking at our Medicaid practices, and more specifically, probably the systems work, although it could be any of them, and how we help our clients and why it's important to help our clients with change management. So, tell us a little bit more about what challenges OCM is designed to address when it comes to our work with Medicaid clients. And Julie, do you want to kick us off here?
Sure. I see the main issue. We are helping our Medicaid clients, and this really applies to all of the industries that we work with for focusing on Medicaid today. The problem we're really trying to help the clients that I'm working with address is being able to prepare staff, providers, stakeholders, families for changes coming in the technology related to applying for and receiving Medicaid services and to be able to serve Medicaid clients. And so we're really working to help staff, providers, families prepare for the change in technology that they're about to experience. So we're currently working with several states on preparing those folks for change, assessing and planning for upcoming changes, including assessing for organizational readiness, which that entails many different types of activities such as conducting focus groups and interviews, sending out baseline surveys to get an understanding of where groups are with the change and what those preferred communication channels are or styles and needs for the different groups impacted by the change. We also look at assessing the preferred way that agencies need to train and how folks receive training and are able to practice in the new system. So those are the things we do with assessing and planning. And then for communicating and engaging, we look at, how are we regularly assisting clients in doing regular and ongoing communications, answering frequently asked questions with answers, facilitating webinars or two-way communications and supporting the change. And then we really help our clients look at guiding individuals and the organization. And this is primarily done through training and transfer of learning, being able to practice changes in a safe environment where individuals get feedback. And we really are also helping organizations look at what resistance to change might look like. Resistance to change is a totally normal reaction. And this is why it's important to spend time and resources to prepare people for change. Just because somebody is initially resistant to change doesn't mean that they aren't open to it. This is why we spend time up front assessing for change and planning for it and communicating about it. And then finally, we help organizations look at how to embed the changes into their current practices, such as like if we have a new system that's been implemented, do we need to change the way we hire for folks? Do we need to look at what pre-service training looks like? Do we need to look and change policies and procedures? So we really look at how to embed the change in the current organization so implementation is successful.
Thanks, Julie. And I think what brought to mind this topic alongside the Medicaid world is, it used to be in Medicaid, child welfare, and child support, are kind of three main areas. They would have a new system every 10 to 40 years, right? It was like a one time, like once in a career event, usually, maybe twice. And the thing that's changed in the Medicaid space in the last 5 or 10 years is that we've moved into this Medicaid enterprise system world that's much more modular. And so, Colin, for our listeners who don't live and breathe Medicaid every day, could you tell them a little bit more about the system change into a more modular or component system and IT world? Help them understand that a little bit more.
About 10 years ago, a little give or take, we used to have sort of what I like to call a super vendor would come in and they would create pretty much all components of a Medicaid system. They would, from the start to the end, they would create every single module in a very waterfall approach and place them piecemeal and as they were going. So the system would start and then it would just sort of go live all together. There was no real agile approach. For example, today they'll say, let's try and get the provider component of this up and running. And then in 10 months, we might be able to get a new recipient portal up. But 10 years ago, no, it took about 5, 6 years. And these super vendors would receive gigantic contracts and they would do everything. Sure, they would sub out some components of it, but it turned out to be a bad fit. It was sort of a catastrophe for all involved. So, about 10 years ago, the government decided, hey, to better suit the states and to allow for maybe these module or to allow for a component of these old Medicaid systems to be shared, they decided to make it modular. In that system, a system integrator would come in and then the state would procure multiple modules from multiple vendors, and so instead of just one procurement effort, it's now become 6, 8, 10, etc. And it's become what was meant to protect the state and hoping that maybe a COTS product, a commercial off the shelf product, might be able to work all over the place, is now proving a little bit more problematic.
Yeah, so if you're looking at that change, I think what's hard about it is, well, what's easy about it is you have smaller components, right? That you can plug in and plug out. So if you have a vendor that you're not happy with or a piece that's not working, you can reprocure it. I think what makes that hard is you're not dealing with a change once every 10 to 30 years now, right? You're potentially dealing with a change all the time or every year. And so I think my question to both of you is really kind of how do you adapt and how do you prepare for this kind of constant change? And how do you manage that constant change when it's not a once in a career event, but rather an ongoing modular change?
Yeah, I think one thing that we help clients with is with that organizational change management methodology and approach, helping to build understanding, knowledge, and skills of leaders who are really leading this effort around in order for the change to be successful, you really have to prepare people for the change. Organizations don't change, people change. And so many times, leaders are very prepared for the technology because they spend the time and resources to really get vendors on board and to get the systems in place, and then kind of expect staff and vendors and families to know what to do. And so what we really do to help people is help those leaders prepare is provide that methodology and understanding of, yeah, we actually need to take time out to prepare people for this change. We need to assess what our current level of support is for staff, for vendors, for contractors, and also for families regarding what this change is going to look like, how people need to receive communications about the change. Are we ready to be able to train people and have a safe space for folks to try out the new systems? And then how do we continue ongoing and two-way communication throughout the project, as well as implement or embed this change into our current everyday business operations? So I think that's what we provide, Stacey, is that methodology and that approach, and also to be able to bring leaders alongside of the technology changes to really look at the people side of change too.
Yeah, and I think the point that you made about like embedding it into the everyday, I think is such an important one because again, I don't think you can any longer think of change as a one-time event. And so
Yeah.
building the knowledge and skills of your workforce to deal with that ongoing change is such an important piece of this, especially as we're looking in the Medicaid space. Are there anything else that you guys have seen our clients do around change management for modular systems change that is working really well?
Well, I think it starts with the mindset sort of that Julie was talking about. We had one client that literally painted on a wall in their office building how the banned phrases. And one of them was, well, this is the way it's always worked. That was not allowed. So we couldn't bring that up in meetings. And I think that was something that we used to hear that a lot, especially from the people that had been working, that were longtime state workers that have been working on these systems, like you said, for 20, 30, 40 years, people close to retirement. And they're all of a sudden going from this old system to now 6, 7, 8, these new modules. So it's been really tricky trying to find people that are adept at that level of change, and also introducing, kind of flipping the states on their head. It used to be that we often saw states were less technologically advanced or prone to adopt new technologies. Now they're out there looking for the latest and greatest with every single module. So they want to make sure they are on the bleeding edge so that whatever they procure and bring on is not already out of date. And it's fascinating how in just a span of really 5 years, we've seen the mindsets of these states just really flip from the old what we used to think of them.
Yeah, moving from those legacy systems to something that's state of the art. And I've heard them talking about, chatbots and AI and
Yeah.
just, yeah, very, very different technology that they're working with these days.
I have a really great example. We're working with a client right now who's implementing a new portion of their modular enterprise system. And the approach that that client has wanted to take is they have wanted to learn the organizational change management methodology as a part of a workshop or training that we're doing. And that particular project has been so successful. So the reason why it's been successful is we have been working alongside the leadership team in that particular state where we are teaching them our organizational change management methodology based on ProSci, based on a industry standard. And we've been teaching them, showing them about what you do to prepare for change. And then they have been actually doing the steps that we are recommending. So they're the ones developing their case for change. They're developing their organizational change management team charter. They're the one who's really looking at how to, they've developed their own organizational readiness assessment based off the recommendations we've made. So it's been a really positive project for us to work on. And our client has really been highly satisfied too, because they're getting their own professional development and also learning about organizational change management methodologies that they're easily ready to apply once those workshops have completed. So we have one more workshop to go with this particular group. In this last workshop, they really want to dig more into communications, particularly around providers. And then we're going to be talking with them about what resistance to change looks like, what those behaviors look like, and how to overcome that resistance. And then also embedding the change into their organizational culture. So it's been a really exciting project. And again, we hear from the client constantly how much they've enjoyed this work and how much they've grown from it. So,
That's great. One of the examples that I wanted to share with an older client when they were going through their first kind of modular procurement was really, I think, the importance of leadership at the highest level, getting behind the change and really out there talking about it all the time. I think they often don't want to be involved because they're busy and they think that's something that someone else can handle. But I think it's so important that they're out there and they're sharing their vision and they're talking about it and kind of championing it. And I think one way that this client that I have in mind did in particular was doing a really good job with the case for change and then continually coming back to that. So every time that she spoke, right, it was talking about that case for change and reminding people about what that was. For those that don't live in the OCM world, Julie, would you just give a brief overview about what that case for change is and why it's important?
really, the case for change to me is a grounding for the project work or for the change that states are implementing. So it really addresses the five whys: the who, what, when, where, how, and why. Six whys. So it really talks about, hey, it's a document that really talks about to anyone involved in the project or anyone who's going to be affected by the change, like why the organization is implementing this change. What problem are they trying to fix or overcome by implementing the change? Why it's important to the organization, why the change or the project aligns with organizational values, the mission, vision, and goals of the organization, And then it really gives more specifics about, okay, this is who's going to be affected by the change. This is when this change is going to happen. This is how you're going to be informed about the change. So it really spells out the organization's communication responsibilities, and what that's going to look like, how frequently the organization is going to communicate with the various stakeholders that are involved or engaged, and what that looks like, whether that's email communication, website updates, SharePoint information, and or opportunities to engage in two-way communications in team meetings and organizational meetings and webinars. And then it really talks about like, hey, at the end of this project, this is what we have hoped to have accomplished. And this is how we're going to accomplish that change. So it's a really kind of a high level roadmap for the change. And I love, Stacey, that you just talked about like it's an important grounding document and it's something that a leader should continually revisit and reference because it has all of that key information anybody involved in the change would need to know.
I always come back to like the most important part of that case for change is the why, right? And I think, Colin, you talked about this too. Like, if I'm a worker and I've been there for 20 years working in the same system and you're changing it all, and we're going from one vendor to managing 8 vendors, I want to know why, right? And I think the way to deal with that resistance and the way to get people to get on board is making sure that it's a very persuasive why behind that case for change, why we need to make the change, why they need to make the change. And it's such an important piece that people either rush through or miss and forget to come back to.
Yeah, and that goes back to what I said at the beginning of this. Being comfortable it's a great thing where you work, but it's also a very dangerous thing as well. And it's hard to fault these people. They've been doing this for so long and they're very comfortable with their day-to-day lives. They're very good with an outdated system and they do things so quickly considering how slow the system is, which what always amazes me. And well, at least for Medicaid, for example, we're going to them and saying, well, we want to give you or help you implement a new system that's going to be so much faster. We're talking weeks faster and where you don't need to snail mail certain things like eligibility and third party liability notifications, and this is all going to be online. In fact, it'll be done by the end of the day. You're good to go. And there's still real fear for this change. And I completely understand it, but to me, it's one of those things where, unlike Julie, I don't really go in before and make the case for change. I'm usually there to help them ride out the change, but also sort of remind them that don't settle for less. You have invested so much of yourselves and not only your money, but your political capital to adopt this change. Make sure you have the quality there as well. Don't settle for this.
Yeah, and make sure it's what you pay for. Make sure you're not just recreating those workarounds from an old system, right?
Exactly.
Which brings me to my next question. So, a little bit of reflection. We talked about things that you've seen gone well or things that clients have done that have worked really well with these changes. What about lessons learned? And I think one of mine is that, right, where I've seen clients kind of they end up with the user groups who are in there for design sessions talking about ways that the system worked before that were really workarounds, right? But they end up getting that built into the new one. Are there any other lessons learned that you guys would share with audience?
Oh, so many. Stacey, you mentioned before, like having that leadership engagement and involvement in the organizational change management activities. I think that's where we're seeing success with that one client I mentioned earlier. The leadership team is bought in and they see it as a part of their job to facilitate and be the, quote unquote, change agents of their organization. So I really do think that that is one key to success. And so one lesson learned is I think for clients that we see where teams may not be as engaged as they should be in tending to the people part of the technology that's being implemented, it can be a real deficit. There's a lot of time and attention paid to the technology side, but you have to have people to operate the technology. Even AI, you got to have somebody to push the button, right? So I really think a great lesson for project teams and for leaders to be aware of is making sure someone with high visibility in the organization is really driving that change and paying attention to the people side.
Yeah, I definitely have to agree with that. If somebody high up that is influential is not really just ecstatic about the change on a day-to-day basis, then it trickles down into everybody else. So we definitely need that support. And I understand it may be a facade at times and they may be frustrated, but if they slip and let it be known that they're not quite into it or they're having second guesses or airing those frustrations, and it really a lot of people are going to pick up on that.
What about times where you've had to kind of pivot, where you thought or your client thought something was going to work, but we know change isn't always linear. And so you had to either pivot or rethink your approach and try something new.
Oh, yes. I think COVID gave us all of those lessons, right? One former client of ours, they were in the middle of implementing one of their modules for their Medicaid enterprise system. And we had all of these plans laid out to do some in person road shows to engage the staff out in the state who were at their district level offices. And so, we at the time could travel. So we made all of these plans for the leaders to go and present information. We like booked everything, like everything was signed, sealed, and delivered. And then we got okay, we've got to figure something else out. And fortunately, the leadership in that state was really prepared for that. So we ended up shifting some of our OCM activities to be virtual. We actually ended up with a better turnout because folks didn't have to travel for these in person sessions. And we got better engagement. We ended up coming up with these great breakout groups and really engaged the staff a little bit more directly. Might not have gone that way if we had done that in person. So I think there's definitely a lot of lessons learned from COVID to being able to be adaptive and resilient in things that might not be going the way we expect it to be going. So yeah, I think that's a great question.
We had a client where talk about a pivot. Things had been a real struggle and they were on the home stretch for one of their modules, but it was almost every week was just getting sort of worse and worse and off track from what was originally promised and what they thought they had procured. And one day we are literally weeks away from go live. They had already started a soft launch and then they pulled the plug. I actually think it's so courageous. So courageous. I think of it this way. When's the best time to plant a tree? Is it today or 10 years ago? So they knew that their system from procurement up was just not working. To allow this to have happened to all the struggles they had. So what they did is they canceled this, terminated the vendor, and then they sort of imagined their procurement efforts. And it was a struggle for us, but we were there and now we love it. It's really helped us and we're kind of using these efforts for all of our clients. In fact, they gradually ease into it and introduce sort of an OCM methodology in the beginning to really pinpoint all the people that are going to be impacted. And instead of just diving straight in on these procurement efforts, they get all the stakeholders' voices. And it's shocking how passionate some of these state workers are about it. And they really want to help make these procurements work. So I think the courage of this state to just say, this isn't working, instead of pumping money and political capital into a failing effort, let's just terminate it. Yes, it's going to look bad, but their restart has been really admirable, and I'm really excited for what their future is going to bring.
That is so courageous and so hard. And, we've seen, I'm sure you guys have seen this, I've seen it too, where clients are looking at, the sunk cost, what they've already spent and, didn't want the PR of having to cancel something. And then they end up with what they don't want in the end. So I love hearing about a client who is willing to kind of step out there and do that because it is very hard, especially in this day and age. Okay. What about you? I know, Julie, you brought up leadership a lot. And I know a lot of the executive level leadership that we're working with, right, is they're not actually doing the change, but they're definitely responsible for leading the change. And so, what would be your advice for leaders who are navigating the complexities of this change and these modular systems in today's world?
Yeah, I would tell leaders, like, in addition to implementing this big technology or new business processes or any big change like this, to give time, energy, and resources to looking at the people side of change. We talk about it at PK. We've got to, in addition to getting the technology ready, we've got to get the people ready for the technology. So give that time and energy and attention to the people side of change through communicating, communicating, communicating. That would be my advice.
I'm going to go back and kind of parrot something I already said. Don't settle. Make sure you get exactly what you are pushing for and what you originally sought out. Remember why you were frustrated to begin with and what prompted your need to seek out this change. It was a very good reason, obviously, to invest these funds and to undergo the headache that often is this change. So remember that and don't settle when the time comes because you're going to be presented many, many opportunities to just kind of say, this will just be easier if we do this and go with this. Remember the people that are going to be using the system and eventually the people who the system is for. The stronger that system, the easier it'll be when it's all over.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up, Colin, because if you're thinking about how we make sure that, this change is having the impact that they want it to have, what is it that they should be watching or measuring to make sure that they're having that impact?
Well, to me, I would be collecting all the information about the demographics and finding metrics. Let's say they're having issues with eligibility, that it's taking 6 months to get somebody eligible for Medicaid. They want to get it down. Well, I think they need to remember those KPIs, those key performance indicators, and work those into the procurement and make them sort of their North Star for when they're actually creating the system and make sure that vendors are well aware of that too. When it comes to testing the system, when you eventually get there, you want to make sure that all of those are still obtainable
Mhm.
and make sure that you are pushing it as hard as you possibly can to make sure that it's going to do what you want.
Yeah, I think so much of it comes back to that vision, right? And the why of why you embarked on this project is exactly what you said, Colin. Like, what is it that you're trying to solve? And then making sure that those are measures that you know what the current is, right? And you know where you're headed. Because if that system's not doing that for you, you don't want to procure it, you don't want to purchase it, you don't want to keep building it, right? Because you're not going to ultimately have the impact that you want it to have. And I think that also helps with some fear and resistance too. I'm remembering a project where some of the resistance came from, well, the system's so much more automated, then I won't have a job, right? And so the leadership was able to articulate, yeah, right now you might be doing data entry because our system requires a lot of duplicate data entry, but we don't want you doing that forever. You're still going to have a job, but your job's going to be more meaningful, right? You're going to be working with clients or you're going to be, doing something that, and I think articulating that and laying that out as the impact and then knowing how to measure it and watch it to make sure it's happening is such an important piece of a change effort.
I completely agree and would also add about looking at metrics to measure the efforts regarding change activities. So, I think one thing leaders should look at are resistance to change behaviors, knowing that resistance is completely normal. It's a completely normal response to change, and really paying attention to what that looks like, and then being able to implement things such as increased communications, or can we have office hours where we talk with people about the upcoming change and talk about those fears that people might be experiencing? Or can we implement some sort of a feedback loop where people are able to give input into the design and development process? So I think it's important to pay attention to the business side and the business metrics, but also those indicators from people too about their level of adaptability to the change.
Yeah, because you want to see, I mean, yes, there's resistance, but you want to see that resistance go down over time, right?
Yep.
As a direct impact of the people change management that you're doing. And that's a huge piece of it, right? Making sure that we're seeing that more people are aware of it, they have knowledge of it, they're less resistant to it, they have the tools that they need in order to make the change, and they know why. And being able to measure that is such an important piece. I'm glad you brought
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I appreciate you guys sharing your stories today. It's been really fun to learn more about the work that you're doing with our Medicaid clients to create change in their systems. One last question, which is there anything else that you'd like to share today, or anything that you wished I would have asked you?
You did say something about specifically about resistance to change, and you said automation. And so, automation and AI, our clients pretty much know this, but there's a real fear, of course, is that you're right. They're scared that one day these systems are going to take their jobs. And I just don't see it anytime soon. I mean, I guess one day when we're all being replaced by robots, that day could come. But in the near term, 10 years, 20 years, the people that are doing these jobs are the ones that truly care. They have the heart to read these cases, to make sure these people are getting the best care possible. And there's nothing right now that can replace that heart. There's nothing. And as long as our clients, and especially the vendors, they got to remember that this is eventually everything they do is for the people, and they got to remember that heart. AI can only take you so far.
I love that you mentioned that, because we get the privilege of getting to work with just such amazing clients. But I've also seen so many of our clients say, part of the justification for the new system is, well, they can have less people, right? They can hire less people. And I've never actually seen that be true,
No.
because there's so much work, right, that our clients need to be doing that they don't have time to be doing. And so it almost always just means a shifting of
Mhm.
roles and a shifting of priorities, and usually to something that's much more valuable and much more in connection with the people that they serve, right? Which
Mhm.
just makes the employee that much more satisfied, because most of the people got into this work for that kind of altruistic piece of their job. And usually that means they get to do a little bit more of it and a little less systems work, which is always good.
I really love that. And I'm really glad Colin brought up the reason why we do this work. The reason why we are in this business is to help the families that we serve. And so I think if leaders can keep that in mind, and also leaders empowering their teams to really innovate and to implement this change that's going to be positive, but also is during a time of uncertainty. And one thing I would add is, it's assume positive intent regarding working with others, and giving people the time and space to adapt to the change that you're asking them to implement. It doesn't happen overnight, and it can happen smoother, more quickly, with the proper supports and time and attention given to organizational change management activities.
Yeah, I always love, and Julie, you've heard me say this probably more times than I can count, but you can make the messy middle shorter, you can get easier, but you never get rid of the messy middle.
Correct. That is exactly right.
All right, you two. Well, thank you very much for your time. It's been a privilege to be here with you today, to connect, to learn, to grow, to breathe, and to share. Until next time.